everyone! Today I'm going to be doing a non-spoiler review of The Vine Witch. I was sent an ARC copy of this book from Wonderkind PR, and I usually don't read or review unsolicited copies of books, but this one really caught my attention, so I decided to read it and review it for you. I'm not sure when exactly this video was going up, but this book is officially released on October 1st, so let's just get started with my thoughts on it. Or I guess we should start with what the book is about. I haven't done a review in such a long time, I really forgot how to do these. So this book is set in turn-of-the-century France on a wine vineyard. Now, all the vineyards in this area really rely on vine witches who use their magic to, you know, make the stuff grow and whatnot. In this book, we follow a vine witch called Elena, and she has been cursed by an ex-lover and turned into a toad. And at the beginning of this novel, I think it's 7 years, she has been under this curse, and now she has finally turned back into a human, and she returns to her vineyard, which she was supposed to inherit, but she now finds belongs to this man who is very skeptic of the witches, and he prefers to run his vineyard based off of science rather than magic. So she has to hide her identity of being a witch so that she can kind of work on this guy's vineyard and try and get her vineyard back, and also seek revenge on the person that cursed her. I unfortunately ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. I was very excited for this book. Like I said, it was unsolicited, so when I saw it in the mail, I was immediately attracted to this cover and also the synopsis of it, which I will say the synopsis left off the part that it turned her into a toad because that made it a little bit more cheesy than I expected, but yeah, I figured y'all should probably know that little detail. So I had very high expectations for this book because it just sounded so great, and it really, the idea behind it is really good and it had a lot of potential. Unfortunately, it just wasn't executed to the best of its ability. I'd say the biggest downfall of this book was that all aspects of it just weren't fleshed out enough. Like, I actually really liked the characters, I really liked the romance that happened in this book, even though it was a bit insta-lovey, but it just wasn't fleshed out enough. We never really got to connect with the characters, and that could also be because it's told in third person, and I definitely prefer first-person stories just because being connected to the characters is such a big part of the story for me, so I prefer to, you know, be in their head. Another big downfall was the setting. Like I said, it's set in turn-of-the-century France on a vineyard. This had so much potential to be such a beautiful setting. It could have been really atmospheric, but the author just didn't do much world building or any kind of descriptions to really put you in the setting. Another thing which I actually read about in somebody else's review, and after I read it I realized how true the statement was, and that is that you should really be able to like tell a time period just based off of, you know, the descriptions in the book. Whereas in this book we didn't get a whole lot of descriptions, so if it didn't say on the back that it's set in turn-of-the-century France, you wouldn't have been able to know that. Like, there was very minimal descriptions of any of their clothes. The only really thing you had to go off to base when it was set was that we knew that cars were around, but they were like still a new thing. Like, there were still people with wagons and horses. Like, if you had a car you had to be like very rich. So that's the only thing that we really had to place where the story is without just being told off the back that it was set in turn-of-the-century France. Another thing that I did read in somebody else's review as well, not to be just like stealing all my thoughts from other people's reviews, but they're just things that I didn't notice while reading, but then when I heard other people bring it up I was like, oh, that's a valid point. There were a few times in this book where the author used French, and somebody said in their review that there were actually a couple of times in here where the French was actually wrong. So that's unfortunate. I don't know French enough to know that for sure myself, but that's just what I heard somebody else say, so that's just something to maybe be aware of before picking this book up. As far as the plot goes, just like every other aspect of this book, like, it was good and it had so much potential, but it just fell kind of flat. I haven't read a whole lot of witch books in my day, so I don't really know how original this actually was, but for me it was pretty original just because, like I said, I haven't read a whole lot of other witch books before. Pacing of the story was also kind of off, and there were just certain like plot points of the story or certain scenes that she just chose to go into but didn't choose to include other scenes. Like, those aspects of the story were brushed over. I can't really say much about it because I don't want to spoil the story for anybody, but there's just like, you know, 3 months has passed and it's like, well, what happened in that 3-month time period? Like, just the pacing and everything was a little bit off. I feel like we needed to see that time because that might have also been why the story or the romance was a little bit more insta-lovey, because we missed these 3 months or 6 months. I don't even remember how long the time was, but it's just like this chunk of the story where you would see these characters getting to know each other, and we missed that, if that makes sense. Also, remember how I said that the synopsis doesn't say that she was turned into a toad, it just says that she was cursed? Well, the storyline opens and it's very jarring with her as a toad, and you're just not expecting it at all. Like, I'll read you the first like paragraph, and this is how confused I was, having no idea that I was about to open reading from a toad's perspective. So it says, her eyes rested above the waterline as a moth struggled inside her mouth. She blinked to force the wings past her tongue, and a curious revulsion followed. The strangeness of it filtered through her toad brain until she settled on the opinion that it was best to avoid the wispy yellow-winged ones in the future. Yeah, so that was just a very jarring opening, having no idea that she was a toad. And I suppose the final kind of negative thought I have for this book, because this review has been rather negative, hasn't it, is that there really was no setup for the sequel. It looks like on Goodreads there is a second book, but like the story is concluded at the end of this book. So there really is no setup for the second one. Not that I'd be really motivated to pick up the second one anyway, just because, like I said, it wasn't that great, but still, had there been some kind of like cliffhanger or something, I definitely would have been more tempted to pick up the sequel. Like I said, this review has been very negative, but I did give it 2.5 stars. There were aspects of the story that I liked. Like, genuinely, while I was reading it, I felt like I was enjoying it, but just not as much as I could have been had all of these things been better. So yeah, I think that basically concludes my thoughts on this book. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!
You hear that, Samson?